Game design is about taking an idea and figuring out how do I make that work, right? What resources have I got? What are my constraints? How do I break that down into its component parts so that a team of people can make it happen? You've got a limited budget. You've got backers and financiers and publishers breathing down your neck. There are deadlines to meet, and there is only so much a team can do. The important thing is to figure out what is important, right? What is the most important thing for us to do right now to make this game awesome?
If you're a coder, you're going to get more money making software for banks. People who make games love games. It doesn't feel like work sometimes when you come into an office or you're on a call with people and you just enthuse about the subject, like what we're going to do today, how are we going to make this better, with an end goal of like, this is something is going to play, this is going to entertain, and someone is going to enjoy and derive joy from the thing that we're making. Like, it's just so rewarding.
Guys, welcome to The Party's Full. We're doing a game design roundtable today. Fundamentally, I brought you guys together because I really want to understand, where is game design heading? Where does it innovate? What are its constraints? And to be honest, what is game design to begin with for anyone coming in and just wanting to learn more about what the craft is? And I've joined by 3 industry leaders right here that I'm super excited to be able to talk to. Hal, we spoke on a previous podcast episode. Nigel, great to meet you. We met today. And Will as well. Hal, why don't you begin by introducing yourself, and then we'll just go around.
Goodness. Well, I was blessed to have 2 amazing supporters throughout my entire life, Nigel and Will. I started designing games in 97, and I met Nigel that same year, and he was always a tour de force. I think he was just created from an egg of game design. I kind of flitted around Psygnosis, Codemasters, Warthog, and Sony and places. But most recently and most relevantly, spent about 10 years at D3T doing codev. So learning how codev is the same and also different to standard game dev and game design, and the business side of stuff as well. So yeah, just keep it short and sweet. That's me.
Nigel, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Nigel. I've been making games professionally since 1989. It's a long story, but basically I'm a university dropout who was the 2nd best dungeon master in his hometown. Basically, I've worked at a lot of classic places, sort of made games through the late 80s, early 90s, noughties, all the way through to the modern day. I made a lot of racing games. I've worked at Sony, I was the game director on the MotorStorm games. I've done a lot of freelance work, so I've done a lot of coal-faced game design for various clients. And the last 8 years, I've been design director at Wushu Studios. We're a codev studio. We're now about 170 strong, working across quite a variety of projects.
All right. Thank you, Nigel. Will, last but not least.
It's weird being the young designer in the room now, because I've been making games for about 20 years and I'm like wearing that as a badge of pride, and like got my first start making racing games with these gentlemen. Hal was my first design lead, like doing tech design setup on racing cars and making sure they go where they need to go and what happens if they don't, and kind of learning the tech setup. My background at university, I did programming, so I've always been kind of more tech aligned, and that got me into kind of designing the systems that go behind the tech setup. So was a system designer on Star Citizen for many years in Manchester, and then moved to Sweden, which is where I'm based right now, working at Avalanche Studios, and then more recently at an indie startup called Chief Rebel, who are making a game called Fellowship, which does kind of dungeon raiding and stuff like that. I've been doing that for about 3 or 4 years as a design lead on that project. But that's a very small, like coming from somewhere like Star Citizen, which had a couple of hundred, to with 30 people, kind of wearing many hats right now. So I'm doing a little bit of production, a little bit of everything. But yeah, a lot of fun.
So how do we define game design, guys? For anyone coming in and listen, like it's such a broad discipline in a lot of ways, and like you guys have mentioned so many different types of games that you've designed and built over the years. Like, how would you define it? Will, I'll start with you.
I think to kind of sum it up, because a lot of books have been written on the subject, but I think I always see game design as just creative problem solving. There's every different day you're faced with a design a problem that is like, how do we get 3 people to see where we need to go next? Or we have a background ticker that is ticking down, and we need to give some feedback. Like, it's whatever the problem is that given day, and understanding what do we already have, and then finding a creative solution that solves that problem. So I see my job as largely a problem solver, with as little fuss as possible. The elegant design solutions.
Nigel, Hal,
It's a broad church, right? Game design is a very, very broad church, right? I mean, simply put, you divide developers into artists, coders, and designers. And designers are the kind of slightly odd one out because there's not really necessarily a tangible skill you can identify on to cover the broad category, right? Designers come in many flavors, but generally speaking, the kind of design work is like ideation, making shit up, right? Implementation, kind of making things work, right? And then iteration, which is playing with what you've created to make sure you're creating a good experience. But generally, and that could mean some coding, that could mean some blueprints, that could mean playing with spreadsheets, that could mean doing whatever. But we kind of, there's a very, very broad set of skills a designer needs. And generally, designers will specialize, but it's kind of in the gaps that kind of art and code don't really fill, right? Which is the kind of the user-facing side of stuff, the experience, right? Is kind of what you're responsible for, which is why it's quite hard put a finger on it, because the experience is quite subjective, right? There's a lot of subjectivity in what we do. There you go.
I think Nige, for me, hit it on the head. I think the design is essentially the interface between the people that create what you do and see and what the player is doing. And using those rules in a creative way to present new and interesting experiences for players, and frequently breaking them in so doing. I think that an essential part of that is empathy. I think that is understanding what the player is going to be feeling, anticipating that. I think is a critical part of what designers do. But at the other end, like a systems design is basically kind of taking an abstract real world situation and breaking it down into rules and saying, so this is how we're going to be doing it. So that systems, then you've got level, you've got tech, you've got all sorts of different design specialisms now that weren't around necessarily 10, 15, 20 years ago. And they all have their own intricacies. So, but as we said, it's kind of the where the player meets the team almost. That's where the designers play.
And I think you touched on a really good point there. It's not just game design, it's systems design, it's level design, it's combat design. There are all these branches that have come out of game design. So when you guys maybe started early in your careers, it was just game design, and then these specializations emerged, right? Yeah.
And then there was no paradigms, there was no sense of, right, this is exactly what you do. There was just a feeling that we needed game design. And you were the odd job man. You ideated stuff, you made stuff, you chose what, kind of decided how the game should play out. But then somebody created a tool, and there was a very monotonous aspect of like, right, now you've got to play with data to craft the experience that you want, which is Will's talking about when you were talking about doing the AI splines in MotorStorm. That was quite drudgery work. Now, there was a front end to the game design in that, which is kind of, this is how we want the AI to work. And you work with the code team to figure out how they're going to implement that. But then there was markup you need. You need to be able to tell the game how to behave. And so while Will was essentially just laying splines down, he was laying splines down in a creative fashion that was supposed to promote a kind of an emotional response from the player, right? He was thinking, because a lot of game design is about, because a lot of games are about smoke and mirrors very much, and just creating an illusion of visceral entertainment, but obeying a rule set. So even just what could be seen as the drudgery of laying down racing splines is actually, there's an element of creativity and craft to it. And as a designer, you've got to work at both ends of the spectrum, right? You've got to be able to look at the big picture and the micro picture at the same, not necessarily at the same time. I think it's hard to do at the same time, but you've got to have the capability of doing that sort of thing, or hopping between the two.
I think
Yeah.
designers are often kind of like a nexus point in the team as well. It's what you want to avoid is a siloed team where no one talks to each other, and often the grease in that machine will be the designers kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's going on with engineering? Why does that work with what we've got from art and so on? So there's, I think the communication side of things for me is a fascinating and integral part of what a designer does in the team as well. The ideation is actually quite a small part of it. It's kind of implementing, and as Will says, problem solving, and it's coming up with ideas is such a tiny part of what a designer actually does.
And everybody has loads of ideas, right? It's not like we have a monopoly on ideas, right? But game design is about taking an idea and figuring out, how do I make that work, right? What resources have I got? What are my constraints? How do I break that down into its component parts so that a team of people can make it happen in a video game?
Yeah, I think keeping the rest of the game in your head, because I think, I've had coders who were like, wouldn't it be cool if, and it's a designer's responsibility to understand, oh no, but we have this thing over here and that would conflict with that, or that would just be boring. Like sometimes something is like, oh, that's an interesting idea, but it's dull. And I think like maintaining but is the player having fun, or does a coder want to just make something interesting, or does an artist want to really show off some VFX right now? We need to not only understand what the player needs, but also what does the game already have. And we've just done that cool trick, like a nice reveal 5 minutes ago, and you want to do another reveal because you made them 6 months apart, but in the game this is going to come right after this. So you're like, if you're making a movie, you're like a script writer, the sequence of events. And if you want to move a scene to an earlier part of the game, it's like, okay, well, that's not going to work because I haven't given you the rocket launcher yet to be able to do. So you need to have an understanding of the continuity. You need to have an understanding of the player's interest. And we're asking you to watch a cutscene while also drive a car. Is like, my focus is elsewhere, like understanding what's the player supposed to be doing at any given time. So we have to kind of take all of these inputs when we're making those decisions and then finding what is the right fit at the right time.
Absolutely. And sorry, Will.
It's okay.
I guess a lot of that is that the two different models that you need in your brain as a designer, right? You need the micro model and the macro model of what's going on. And certainly when you're operating in a team of designers, basically the lead designer's job is there to have the big picture, right? But they can't, I guess the mistakes of people before, you can't have all of the picture, and nor can you focus on one particular bit that you particularly like at any one time, right? You have to have a team of designers underneath you who are each looking at the micro picture and can form an abstract to you, so you can fit together those more abstract patterns of how the game's working together, right? So it's how a team synergizes and communicates so that you're getting, as an effective lead designer, you need to have a good idea of what the game's going on. You shouldn't focus on any particular area at any one time. And generally people bring you problems, things that are problematic or things that aren't quite working, or two of these abstracts parts of the game don't quite synergize together. How do we do that, right? So it's an interesting, you need a good team. Basically, it's not just, game design is not a singular thing. Certainly in big games, right? Certainly in AAA games and stuff like that, you're working with a load of people and artists and level designers and animators and all that. And as Hal said, you're the glue that holds people together. You're kind of the communication conduit to make sure we're making something that is the right thing, the thing that the client wants, the thing that the game wants, is the thing that players want, and something that's achievable in the time and with the time and people that you've got to do it with, right?
What's the relationship with developers, right? Because I've been in game studios where the designer is essentially the developer and the designer at the same time. I've been in other studios where the disciplines are a bit more split. What are your thoughts on that?
Different places do it different ways. I think there's no one size fits all. There are benefits and drawbacks to any kind of setup. The weirdest one that I worked at was actually Codemasters back in the kind of turn of the century, where the designers for all the games were in one place together, but away from the dev teams, away from the Colin McRae team and the Toka team and the Footy team and Micro Machines, all that. And that was weird. And it was wonderful from a design point of view because you could share your design questions and issues with other people and get feedback from people that weren't necessarily seeing the same problems every day, which was lovely. But then if you want to talk to the engineer that's doing your car physics, to get up, walk down the corridor, walk up the stairs, go into the team, and it was like, it's a whole different area of the building, which is kind of like, well, that's an awful lot of friction to communication. So yeah, that's just one weird example, but generally it's kind of, from my point of view, putting everyone together is the best way.
Yeah, and nowadays we tend to have functional pods, right? So you basically, if you're working on a piece of a game or a piece of a game or something like that, generally you've got a series of features that you're trying to develop, series of things that you're trying to do, and basically you just pull together a functional pod of developers who are going to do that, which is probably going to include a designer, may include an animator, have a level designer in there, narrative designer if you need one. It's basically a group of people who all need to contribute to a small chunk of a game, and they work closely together. And again, quite often the designer is the glue that kind of hangs all those elements together. Quite often, but certainly with modern engines, with Unreal or things like that, is quite often the designer is also an implementer. He's also a developer. That we're working in blueprints. Designers, you don't need heavy code for a lot of aspects of working in Unreal. And quite often the way it used to be with game design, right, that you would write a game design document, write a game design, basically a written brief of what I want from this feature of a game, and then hand that to a code team who would then interpret what you'd written, write something, and then you kind of feedback on what that is. It was very long-winded. Now, with something like Unreal, a designer can prototype in blueprints. You may not end up using blueprints at the end, but can prototype the experience in blueprints, demonstrate what it wants, and is actually, rather than a written description, because a written description of something isn't a game, right? A written description is just a description of the game. A game, again, transcends the written word. It's an interactive experience. So actually, by expressing your design as a blueprint written interactive experience prototype, that's your game design. People understand it, and then you can optimize it, you can add art to it, you can kind of add all the elements to it and build it up into the feature that you want. So it depends on the engine, because not everybody works in Unreal nowadays. We work on a wide variety of different engines, and the design agency is quite low. So then very much you're a designer, like what Hal said, you're a designer that's telling a group of people what to do, but it's a very much a asynchronous sort of experience, right? You're going, here to go and do this, come back and tell me when you've got something that kind of does that. Whereas with the sort of Unreal, it's like, as a designer, you're constantly doing iteration with a very, very small group.
Iteration is so vital for an active design, like especially if you're on the side of a design that is more numbers focused. If you're figuring out how does a car feel, or if you're figuring out how much recoil to put on a machine gun, if you have to write a document with numbers for a coder to input, the turnaround time to see like, was that actually good? Like you need to compile and build and sit there with a console in hand. Like you could be waiting a day just to go, that wasn't quite right, go again, in some extreme cases. And I think, yeah, to be a coal-face designer who is actually like putting in numbers, playing it, testing, some of that, you don't want to be a paper designer. And actually, like if you were looking for designers to hire for a role, is that I just write a lot of documentation. Like you're not the right fit for the kind of work that we're going to need. The speed at which our agile team moves.
Yeah. And the documentation side of stuff was, because the documents weren't just telling exactly what to do. We did do an element of, right, I want the recoil. I want to be able to tune the recoil number. So you'd express that in the document, right? So you'd tell the, but again, even the turnaround time was then, because there'll still be, even back in the day, there would be a lot of, but not on number crunching, but quite often you'd be playing in spreadsheets or something weird like that. Whereas with something like Unreal, as you say, that fast iteration is what you see is what you get. You can have turnaround and results within minutes rather than hours or days or even months, right? Certainly on a big AAA project, when a feature request goes into this big machine, it's like you may or may not get results, right? Because somebody somewhere is ordering how important your bit of design is according to everything else. So you've always got to think on your feet, and the more agency you've got over the engine, the better.
We had a system on, I mean, Star Citizen, I was there maybe 10 years ago now, a little later. That's such a vast team. Like at the time there was Manchester, there was Los Angeles, as Frankfurt had an office, and Austin had an office, and so there was design stakeholders for so many features in different time zones that you would, as a system designer, I want to figure out how we're going to move some cargo between ships, and it was a heavy simulation-based game, so it's going to affect the weight class of different things, and Chris Roberts, the game director, was very adamant on it needs to be a very physicalized game. If I want to move cargo, I don't just press a button and it unloads or loads my ship that Elite was doing. He felt like the important thing, the identity of the game, is that this is a physicalized process of pick up and put down. If we wanted to implement we need to expand on the cargo system, let's say. So many stakeholders in different time zones need to get buy-in, need to understand what you're trying to do and authorize and things like that, that we couldn't just I'm going to do this thing. Like, you needed to be a paper designer that wrote a wiki article about how it's going to work, who it's going to knock onto. This needed to be sent up the ladder. This needed to be checked. The bigger the ship, the harder it is to steer. And so in that sense, you do need eyes on to review. Everyone needs to ask questions. And I think in that sense, being a paper designer really helped, because you still need to, like as Hal said, you still need to grease the wheels. I still need to chase down sign off from tech, sign off from art, sign off from game directive, sign off from narrative. This needs to be used in multiplayer as well as single player. Sign off from the live team, sign off from the story team. Is this going to screw up any? So it's obviously different strokes for different projects, and the size and what you're trying to do, and how close how close the developer is to putting things in. And I think with something that massive, you don't want to give very hungry, very excited designers too much control over the game, because of just, you don't know what is load bearing, you don't know what is going to screw things up.
And that's it. Quite often, people will try and create the sort of platonic ideal of their game design. So I'm going to get a good story I got was from I think the weather system on a Formula One game that a friend of mine worked on back in the 90s, I think, like that. And basically, it's kind of like they had a team working on a weather simulation system for Formula One, right? And so the weather was going to change. It was going to be dynamic and this, that, and the other. And basically, they spent a year on it, and it never really got anywhere, because it was trying to be perfect. It was trying to be the ultimate weather simulator. And ultimately, they couldn't finish it in time, so they binned it. And essentially, they rolled a dice to determine what the weather was going to be. And that was it, right? That was the solution they went on. And nobody complained, nobody noticed, you know what I mean? But the guys working on a weather simulation, you're given that challenge, and you want to make the best weather simulation ever. But you've always got to look at it through the lens of, like, what matters? How much is this going to cost? And is the player even going to notice? If the player isn't going to notice something, why are you doing it? You know, I mean, well, there is the concept of hygiene. You guys have the concept, which is basically things that you put into a game that you have to do well in a game. So, like the controller input, the way the responsiveness, the UI screens, the way it load and saves, and all this sort of mechanical stuff that you have to do, but that nobody will notice if you do it well, right? If you do it well, it's completely invisible to the end user. If it's done wrong, then that's what people bitch about, right? You know, so there's a whole invisible seam of sort of game development behind what you experience as the game that needs to get built. And every project's different. Every team is different. And that's what makes it exciting, right? That you never, you learn from your past knowledge, but you can't necessarily, it's not a factory line. It's not like cut, stamp, do that, next, cut, you're not doing that every time. You're having to realign the way that you think about development to fit the particular project that you're working on.
I think that's a really valuable point. I think because a well-designed game, right, it's an equilibrium of mutually supportive mechanics, and so you're always learning. It's not like you can just make the same again, because just repeating something is not going to be enjoyable or successful. So you always have to learn and figure out what are the problems of this particular group of people, this feature set, this hardware requirements. What are these presenting us with? And so you're always learning. I think that's one of the wonderful things about game development, just generally, is that you can never go, well, I know everything I need to know about this project and it'll be fine. because it won't, and you just don't.
I want to pick up on something Nigel said, which is when you were building that weather implementation system in F1, that the chase was for it to be perfect, but perfection is almost always an impossible task.
Yeah, perfection is the enemy of finished, right? It's something that we say, there's an element, and I don't want to make it sound slapdash. I want to make it sound that we don't care about our work, but it's more important that something is done, right? And a lot of it's sort of like, a game that is the perfect game is the game that's never released, right? Because you're constantly trying to chase everything. You're trying to make everything absolutely sweet, but people don't buy something that's not finished, right? You've got at some point you've got a limited budget, you've got backers and financiers and publishers breathing down your neck. There are deadlines to meet, and there's only so much a team can do. The important thing is to figure out what is important, right? What is the most important thing for us to do right now to make this game awesome? It's that. And there's a lot of little small things like the weather system, right, that feel important to the people doing it because it is their world. It's the only feature they're working on, right? They've got 2 years of their life to invest in this, right? So they're going to make damn sure it's going to be a great job. But at the end of the day, what they're doing to the end user is nice, but insignificant. If it works well, if a weather system works well, nobody will really notice it. They'll just accept the fact that the weather's nice.
I think with most creative endeavors, right, they're abandoned rather than finished.
Yeah.
And whether it's writing a book or a painting or whatever, it's like, just take it away from me before I break something by tinkering too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are we more innovative nowadays?
No,
not we as a group, as in when we're looking at game design. Do we feel like it's we just talked about the pursuit of perfection, but what about the pursuit of innovation? What about trying to push the boundaries of new in game design?
Depends who's paying the bills, right? And how big a cog are your ideas in the vast machine of the game?
Mm-hmm.
I bet that Will has a whole lot more creative freedom now in his indie development than he did in Star Citizen. That's just as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I think
sorry, go on, Will. No, you please go.
I think you can innovate if, like as Hal said, like it depends who's paying the bills, but also like what is the genre that you're innovating and what is the audience looking for? Like, I don't want to say like, well, if you make a Call of Duty, there's no innovation left to do. I think there's tons, but what is the audience looking for? If it's when they did the Outer Space Infinite one, it was like, that's not what we want. And I think, yeah, if you're doing an indie game, you can innovate because you're not standing on the shoulders of any established expectation. But also the indie space is also littered with interesting ideas that had poor execution. I don't think we as an industry have lost any innovation, but I think you end up players just don't see innovation that didn't work. So maybe we only see the innovation that succeeds. What is it?
You have to have failure to have innovation. You have to.
Yes.
There has to be failures, and I think in the indie space, as you say, indie space is amazing. There's all kinds of creative stuff in there, but they're small little kind of games. They don't have massive budgets, but when you're talking big budgets, you've got to guarantee success, right? The important thing is to make sure that actually, I'm going to pay for the 600 people it took to make this game and for the marketing budget and everything else and make sure it's a guaranteed success. And I think you can't afford to be you can micro innovate in small little functional areas, but I think in terms of, we've almost like reached a gameplay singularity, right? As we were talking earlier about controllers, everybody knows that when they pick up a controller and they've got a third person thing, they know that stick's going to do the camera, that stick's going to walk forward, and these buttons are going to do something, right? We've converged on a singularity of experience. That's why we got a lot of open world, a lot of third person stuff. It's not like the genres that we operate in as video games now is kind of very much down to a core chunk of stuff, right? You look at games in the 80s, by their nature, were just all incredibly abstract but just experimenting with all kinds of stuff because that's just, you couldn't. I think people readily accept moving a person around and jumping with a person and shooting with a person and being a superhero. getting into a car and driving a car, that whole experience of kind of inhabiting an avatar, I think makes sense in these kind of first person shooters, third person action games, that kind of the things that people can readily identify with.
I see a lot of innovation though in not like the micro. How does this character going to move? Like as Nigel said, like we've established, like here is best practice. We've figured out, or we've come to an agreement that like this is how it should be, or this is the most common thing. And I think that's very helpful for a player who is going to switch from this game to this game. Like I play this shooter, I got to pick up this shooter. I want it to pretty much play, at least my inputs to be the same. I want my health bar to be in a certain way. I want the same kind of understanding in the shorthand of language, so that I'm not like, okay, how does this game do this really? Why has it got a really weird movement system? It's good that we have a common language for those genres. But what I see is really exciting innovation space is when a new genre just drops and it's like roguelikes have just exploded because it's like after Slay the Spire, it's like, oh, we could do things with card games. We've got so many board games that we've not been tapping into. Now we can bring all of that interest. So then like this just genre just exploded. There is no right way to make a card roguelike anymore because there's so many new interesting ideas in that space. And now Souls like Souls games just did something interesting with its kind of hack and slash, birthed a new genre, and now there's all sorts of like co-ops. And what if this is this instead? Like there's so many more. We could take this element now and stick it with
extraction
this.
shooters, I guess.
Yeah.
They're an they're a soft innovation. They're not a radical departure from FPSs, but you look at how they're now starting to dominate the market, right?
They're exploding now, and I'm sure there's the next little thing that's like, hey, one game did something well, and someone's like, oh, how do we build on that? Oh, if we take this from this, and it's not like the Wild West of like there's just open, uncharted territory, and we can just whatever we say, right? This is a new genre. But now it's some people are playing this, or they're making their own mods, and they're out of the community. They've come up with something new. Like extraction shooters is just battle royale, but what if we're not just trying to kill each other all the time? It's the acquisition. Isn't that fun? Okay, let's make a game around like opening boxes in a battle royale and finding things, and then getting out before, like, not to kill people, just because I like getting stuff. And like, okay, let's build on that. Let's do some interesting things. And I'm so excited to like, okay, what is either extraction shooters birth or something else is going to birth? And I think that's an innovation space that's leading to AAA like mega hits.
But
I think
it
that's
is
exciting.
like an evolutionary tree. You look at like racing games as a arcade racing games as a mainstream genre, right? There's still mileage out there. Horizon still does really, really, really well, but it's very much died off as a branch of that tree, right? Things just spring off other things. The audience react to things. The audience is not that we don't want to make arcade racing games anymore. It's just they're not as popular as they were. People want to be a human. People want to run around, and if they want cars in there, they want their human to jump into a car, get into a car, and drive it around the landscape, right? There's that. It almost seems like an urge to sort of like give the players more human agency as much as possible. But that's that's AAA, right? That's the way that and it's. There's a lot of indie games out there that are all kind of fighting for the kind of the sort of the scraps that AAA give. But I think AAA still are kind of, if you want to form a career in video games, you're going to have to inhabit that space in some way or other, right? Unless you look out and get on a little with an indie crew. But certainly if you wanted something that's going to pay your rent, right, you've got to work for someone who's going to pay you a wage.
Yeah. I'm going to pass it to you, Hal. Did you want to comment?
Well, I had a more of a question, actually, and it's kind of before Nigel started talking about the racing games, I was wondering if the player's experience of improvement is now incremental. The unless AI comes in, that's a whole new thing, right? Kind of procedurally driven games is a whole different ball game. But if the improvements the player is seeing are very small, are we likely to see a retro or a cyclic kind of version of taste? Because 2001, 2002, 2003, in that area, like the number one selling game at Christmas was a racing game, Need for Speed. I think it was like each year. And as I've said, they're kind of like, I imagine you'd struggle to find one in the top 20 these days. But would they come back? You know, and it's more of a kind of like, I don't know, but a question for the hive mind we've got here is that, are we going to see a resuscitation almost of things that have left us? Not just racing games, that's just one example, but, you know, just throwing it out there.
I think, like, in the specifics of racing, I feel like you've got your Mario Karts and you've got, like, I don't think Need for Speed particularly moves the needle anymore. As a brand, it was huge and everyone was kind of very into it. And I think the last one came out and then just did fine. But as Nigel said, like, Forza Horizon is just printing money in terms of like excitement. Like, and I think probably when the next Gran Turismo comes out, that'll probably do quite well. But I think people probably, like, they find I mean, there's a certain level of tribalism anyway. People find that the titles that they like, and if that keeps coming, they'll probably stick with that or wait for it.
They want one racing game and they play Horizon. I mean, the long tail on Horizon 5 is massive, and there's still loads and loads of people playing it and having loads of fun in there. But it's that singularity. It's the racing game that they want and the racing game they need. They don't need 3 a year, right?
So have we now got to
Horizon for the next 5 years till the next one comes out?
So I mean, have we now got to a point where we have the tentpole, the marquee franchises? You've got GTA, you've got Call of Duty, you've got Gran Turismo, and others, right? And they are just the alpha predators in the jungle, and everything else is just kind of like trying to survive around. Are we at that point? Or
I think there's always a market. It's always the case, right? Even if you look at like soap powder, right? It's like, you know, there are some big brands in soap powder that everybody buys, but if you're kind of conscious about what you buy, and there's people who buy, oh, I like this dermatological one, I like this eco one, right? It's a marketplace is, you know, it's not just totally absorbed by giants. And in some ways, you're never going to have occasionally you'll have a breakout hit, right? Occasionally your soap powder go, this is the best soap powder ever, and do massive. But there's always a spectrum of a marketplace there. And I think as long as people can make games and make money making games, right? Not everyone has to sell 20 million copies.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing with like a Call of Duty or something like that. That has to sell tens of millions of copies because that's what it costs to make. It's just economics, I guess.
If you're looking to break into football, soccer games, you've got to be at least as good as FIFA for that group. Like, I mean, it's a huge audience. If you want to make a football game, you know, more power to, like, look at all these players, but they're all playing a tentpole game. They're all playing FIFA, and their friends are playing FIFA, and they've got so much invested in that. I know, like, financially they put it, but also time, and their communities are built around FIFA and how FIFA does the particular things. So if you're going to come in to try to dethrone FIFA, you better not miss. Like, you've got to have exactly what FIFA offers, and then something that FIFA doesn't offer. And at this point, like, that's a very difficult proposition because they are building on what does FIFA have, and then we just add another tiny little feature. But that always keeps us above anyone else who's starting at zero to come in and try to compete against FIFA. It's like we need to fast forward 20 years of all of their work and be able to come in up here, which just either needs a lot of money or you've got to have something so excitingly different. Like, I'm looking at what's the Rocket League but with people type of thing, like a sports game that is so accessible and fun and doesn't try to be FIFA, but it's another soccer adjacent game that allows you to kind of live in that space and maybe take some of that audience. But for racing, and for, like, if your entire studio is built around making this kind of experience that has the brands, that has the dem data for the track, like, if you're trying to get into a space that is either dominated by a temple or has just disappeared, like, you need to be able to do. I mean, maybe it's easier to get into a genre that's kind of faded out than for something that, like, okay, GTA. Like, if you wanted to be a GTA killer at this point, you're gonna need, like, Saudi levels of money to be able to just come in and you need to buy that expertise in.
And
You
even then,
can't
just buying it, you don't just magic something out by buying it. You need a team that knows their
Right.
craft. That you need those people who've. All right, I've worked on the last 5 GTAs. I know how to make a GTA game. Right, you need to create that
and be
culture.
seen as legit.
Yeah.
Like you need the audience needs to say like, oh, this is a project that I want to buy and get into instead of, because that tribalism is true. It's like these are the games that I want to play. And if you're the one group friend in the friend group, he's like, I'm going to try the new Saints Row. You should come play Saints Row with me. It's like GTA 6 is like the 7, like the next GTA is dropping. I think we want to just play that instead. Like, what are you doing with Saints Row or
And I think
True Crime, whatever?
it's. I mean, even look, and you can't bottle lightning. Look at Sony and Concord, right? They put an awful lot of money into that, and then the one that came through was kind of their sort of second, their B tier thing, which is Helldivers, right? And suddenly Helldivers went bananas, and Concord fell flat. I'm sure there's reasons why. I'm sure there's data to explain why, but I guess certainly, the Sony didn't predict that this one was going to go gangbusters and this was just going to fall on its arse, quite frankly. There's always risk. There's always a gamble. And a lot of what you do when you're developing is trying to de-risk stuff, but there is always a risk, right? You're creating a commercial, it's a commercial endeavor, what you're doing. You're creating something to sell. And whatever you can do to sort of get people to buy it, you do it. But sometimes people just latch onto something. The right influencer plays your game at the right time, right? It's just, but you have to try and, certainly if you're spending a lot of money, you have to stack the odds in your favor to make sure that you're going to get a return on that. Otherwise, you ain't making another one of these.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about at the very start, the innovation aspect, right? Because the disincentive then to take on one of these big beasts is enormous. Because the risk is enormous. So you do something that they're not, which is, what our creators did, what like Helldivers did. They just kind of tried something, a new angle, and it pushed through. I think as I mentioned before, I think kind of a procedurally driven game is going to be big at some point in the next 2-3 years, right?
That's what Helldivers is. I mean, that's
exactly, but it's going to be almost it's been baked into the consoles, right?
Yeah. They got a really interesting model where they've got that kind of that narrative, that overarching narrative that's written live by humans, but then the actual moment-to-moment stuff is a lot of it is procedural. We were working as co-developers on Helldivers. We kind of been working on the cities as creating procedural cities, and that's a really interesting level design and sort of like technical challenge to do, but it works and it produces interesting stuff and it's compelling and is a good effective way of keeping content fresh, because that's the problem, right? Content is expensive. Making cars, making characters, creating animation, making cutscenes, the more you have, the more it costs you. If you want to do motion like CG with like real live actors with kind of lip sync, if you want to go down the Baldur's Gate route, right? That's expensive, and that's a lot of people doing a lot of writing and a lot of technology behind it. And you got to be damn sure that it's going to be good, because it's the more content you have. But people play games for longer, so there's a thirst for content, right? Games get stale after a while, so you have to kind of feed the machine in a little way, which is why you get into this cycle of sort of game passes and sort of long tail sort of ways of sort of generating more and more content, because you got to keep people in your game.
Can we unpack procedural for a second? Because I think that's super interesting. But what does it mean for a game to be procedural? Is it kind of a big shift in the paradigm, or is this something that has always existed but is now becoming more powerful?
For a long time, right? In the sense that, like Athnaid says, it is a different way to create new content. Rather than asking an artist or designer to do it, the system does it, and that's fine. But we've always needed the human eye to kind of amend, correct, polish.
Curate.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And I think when it gets to the point where an entire narrative is being created or an entire character arc is being created, then I think that's where it gets fascinating, because that's when my experience of the same game could differ wildly from anyone else's. And it becomes much more personal. And I think a personal story is something that games can do much better than any other entertainment medium. We haven't yet, but I think we will do, and that will mark the kind of point at which games really get to stake their claim as being, we are now different to movies. We're not trying to emulate. We're not trying to have the big movie licenses. We're going to make our own thing, and it's going to blow you guys out of the water because it's going to be individual to every single player who plays it, which is a whole paradigm shift, I think.
One day, hopefully. But I mean, procedural right now, basically, I guess anything that you do to make this piece of gameplay feel different to the last piece of gameplay the player had, right? And that could be very, very simple. Like in some ways, here's a series of cards, draw a set of cards at random. That in itself is procedural, right? It is changing up the nature of gameplay. So, the procedural stuff in Helldivers is, let's generate a fresh city. Here are the rules for what a good city is. Here are the basic, there's still human intervention there, but it's rather than creating one thing, you're creating the building blocks to put multiple things together, right? And it's that's kind of how we do stuff anyway, because, you have to build in efficiency into your systems, right? So you've got to be able to build it once and use it 10 times throughout a level. It's why all the crates look the same, right? In Worlds, you just you basically some person somewhere builds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 crates. And then that crate is going to be used everywhere. Or, even though, but you don't notice it, you don't care that the fact that, like, hang on a minute, this crate's both in South America and the Antarctic. Why is that, right? So yeah, that's kind of the procedural side stuff. And I think it works really well within certain confines. I think, as Hal was alluding to, I think the tricky bit is when, if you want procedural narrative, if you want procedural story, procedural characters, natural language generation, we are on the cusp of that with AI. But how you would do that in the context of video games, I think is still waiting for someone to take that leap. Because again, it's going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of investment, and has risk, right? I guess, but it's that, what was it Martin, our old boss, used to say, is first or best, right? Basically, it's important to be first or best. But if you're first, you'll be interesting, but probably flawed in some way. And then someone else, someone will come along and make something better than you based on your innovations. So it kind of backs that whole why, innovation is there, but it's just like with innovation comes risk, and people don't want to take too many risks.
I think with like the optimization of your time and of being more efficient in your development, to be able to rely on procedural to be able to make endless planets to drop on in Helldivers, or endless parts of planets, is great. Providing that when it goes wrong, it's not catastrophically, like, you're putting your trust in the system, like, and putting your trust in engineers to be able to get it right 100% of the time, because as a designer, you're accountable for the experience at the end of the, like, what the player plays. You are saying, this is what I intend. This is what I want for you. And so if you now, like, yeah, all the inputs should have been correct. So you should get, like, it's, the kitchen has presented you with a meal, but occasionally the meal there's a hair in it, or something. Like, you can't ever control 100% of what that comes out. And when it's a Helldivers level, it's like, yeah, some of these biomes didn't quite gel together, or we've got a system for this, or there's some slight tearing somewhere, or like these kind of like artifacts of a system. When it's just the geometry, or when it's city blocks, versus you're making a stealth action game or something where every inch matters. Like, there's some levels of procedural level design where this is you cannot complete this level, or something like that. Like, and those are the moments where the player's immersion is broken. And even more so if it's a narrative where, like, using any kind of AI chat, and it's like, you've forgotten what I told you 30 seconds ago. If you're 2 hours into a narrative arc, and all of a sudden it's like, I need you to go and find this, and it's like, I already found, like, oh shit, like, it's starting to break, the illusion is starting to break down. Where as a human that's authored content, that suddenly becomes a big problem. You can bug and find the point. If it's a system that's a black box and you don't quite know how it works, or you can't testify that it's going to work, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So,
like, procedural becomes a problem. Imagine, right, that you're you got a bunch of Animal Crossing characters, and those are your mates that you're living with, and they're all AI driven, right? So they'll learn from you and they'll interact with you and stuff like that. But no one was expecting Grok to claim himself as Mecha Hitler and imagine that an Animal Crossing sort of AI bot decided that, right? The more agency they've had, they have to operate within, you could see how something like that would be interesting, but also has a potential for going catastrophically wrong with somebody pressing the wrong button somewhere or a wrong and symbol somewhere. You know what I mean? The more complex, the problem with video games, the more complex you make a video game, and certainly when it comes to procedural means you've got multiple iterations of potential outcomes of what you can generate, the harder it becomes to QA it, right? And that's the important process that everybody forgets of a game, that you've got to QA the hell out of something and test all the different permutations. And that's why games get release bugged, right? Complex games get release bugged because maybe on a big AAA game, you've got maybe 400 or 500 QA people testing this for 6 months. And then suddenly it goes out and now you've got 10 million people doing the same stuff. Somebody somewhere is going to find a bug that a human didn't on the QA team. So the more unless your procedural elements are really constrained within tight constraints, that it becomes an incredibly hard task to test every possible outcome.
It sounds like there are two opposing forces. You have the need for predictability to make gameplay kind of fun. And I was speaking to an AI combat designer who told me, look, if the AIs were far too powerful, it wouldn't be fun anymore. Like there has to be an element of predictability that you can kind of beat the game. And then there's that mystery and that excitement of having a world tailored for you, having a world that is only specific to you and your actions. And it's like a bit of a dance between these two. And now with all this AI stuff, it's like, well, we can really dip our toes now, maybe go up to our knees in kind of procedural stuff, but we're not sure that even makes it a fun game.
Yeah.
And this is where the designers would come in, right? Because if it wasn't a fun game, the designers would be the ones responsible. Because it's like, well, why didn't you make it fun? I remember we had back in Motorstorm, we had the procedural system for figuring out what on earth is going to be happening to the player right now.
Yeah. Well, that was good, but that was just smoke and mirrors again. That was just literally having that ability that the AI. So the rules we had was the AI in Motorstorm was its primary job wasn't to win the race. Its primary job was to entertain the player. Right, that was the number one thing. So the AI was aware of where the player was and whether the player was looking at them or not, and at that point, essentially would roll a dice and see what conditions were met out there, and then do something interesting. Whether that's crash, whether that's sandwich a biker, whether that's flip the bird, the player, or whatever. But it's kind of. It gave the illusion of intelligence. And I think, there was a lot of, at the time, there was a lot of kind of conversations amongst players about this guy's got a grudge against me, right? This guy hates me. It's clever. It's learning what I'm doing to it. And it's not, it's completely reactive, right? It is just absolutely situational. Is the player looking at me? What can I do? I'll do this. And then the player created their own narrative within their head, right? Player built their own story about how this one guy in the red car was after me. And that's so common that you don't need to simulate these sort of things. You can, the humans are easily trickable. It's kind of what movies have been doing for years, right? We believe it's real. We kind of were absorbed in it, but it is just a fantasy. It is just a kind of an artifact that we've created to kind of plant a seed of narrative within you, and then your imagination does the rest.
There's been some discussions at our place of like not using AI, but using procedural in order to make content quicker. And so having a lot of modular pieces and then generating a level out of that. And we can set some rules, but putting the trust at runtime that we're going to be making those levels, that they're always going to be fun. Like, okay, what's our success percentage? Versus, okay, what if we put the procedural at before launch? So we procedurally generate 1,000 levels, and then we internally play them. If we like them, then they get that seed or that information. Like, so they're vetted ahead of time, which still speeds up process. Like as Nigel said, like we need to put out content at an interval. But if you want to have a curated experience of stealth action, or it's a turn-based strategy or something like that, where it's like, okay, these need to be solvable puzzles. Like the level itself is solvable as a challenge. Then we can't just put the system and get infinite levels. But if we can make 20 levels for the next update, and we play them and go, yep, this is good, approved. Like they could all be good, but as soon as we find one that it's not solved, like QA bins it, we take the next one from the list, and so we're always putting out a certain number of vetted, testable, and it's a fixed key or a fixed hash string or something, and then that generates a level, and then we just say, okay, these are the next 50, 100 keys, allow them to generate those, and then the system knows how to make it, and that's been pre-played and pre-approved. And it's testable, it's repeatable. We could always get that exact same configuration, play it again. And I think that was something that was like, that seems like something that we then have ownership of, authorship of, we can say like, this is good, and we can find the same problems that you're facing, rather than it's a complete black box, and you'll never get the same dungeon twice. It's like, oh, the replayability is something that some of our players enjoy. So like, okay, we need it to be replayable. We need it to be from a fixed list. So that seemed like at the stage in where the technology is at, a way for us to kind of have creative control and to speed up our efficiency of the throughput of content.
And that's the important thing, right? That kind of, again, I think back from the Motorstorm days is the most valuable piece of content we had in the Motorstorm franchise were our tracks. But our tracks are also our most expensive asset, right? They required a lot of effort to hand build, hand curate, design, tune, rig, sort of things. Yeah, it was super, super expensive. So the thing that the player valued most out of what Motorstorm had was also the most expensive thing to produce. So it's kind of, yes, we made more tracks, but those tracks were slow. They took a long time. They took a lot of refinement and things like that, right? And so the thing that you can kind of give players extra content from was the thing that took the most, right? And then you look at something like, I don't know, well, the example I always use is World of Warcraft, right? Where they attach value to your name, right? So you had a single name, and then the hoops you had to jump through to get Sir in front of it, right? 3 letters, right? You had to come in and do daily quests for a whole week, right? And then you get to put a Sir in there, and that was like, that's genius, right? Because that's pulling players back into the content to add 3 ASCII characters to the name string of the player, right? But people valued it because it was a unique thing that you had to do. They'd constrained the environment in which they operated, and then players saw something as value. I want to be called Sir, so therefore I'm going to log in and play every day for 2 weeks. Brilliant. Right? So there's always that question when you're making a game, especially when you're thinking, right, what are players likely to want more of? You need to try and spend some time thinking how efficient can I be in manufacturing this thing? Because again, it's I think, game design is creative, but there's also a commercial element that you have to have in the back of your mind with all of this.
I guess back to what I said at the very beginning about the empathy, understanding what it is that players will want, even if it's nominally worthless. Giving it a perceived value means, oh, well, in that case, if other people think it's important, then I should think it's important. I think this, part of a lot of what game design is understanding brains, right? Understanding how people think, anticipate how people are going to react, and trying to put things in the right place to make those rules work for your game.
Yeah, I think I definitely I get more out of watching other people play the games I'm making than I do playing them myself. I think it's a more valuable skill to actually sit and watch someone experience something that you've made. And it's harsh, and it's hard, and it's hard to take sometimes. You're like, why did you miss that? Why did you miss that? But you've worked under assumptions. Again, you're doing something new, you're doing something fresh. There are paradigms that you use to sort of shape what you're making to make sure it's the right thing. Again, back to the old Motorstorm Pacific Rift. Remember the user test we had when we done the campaign flow, and the players just didn't understand how to unlock the rest of the races. So in this user test that we wanted to see, we want players to come in there and play every race in the game and tell us what they thought, is like, after an hour of play, we noticed that players were only playing the first 2 races. They weren't unlocking any of the races, but they didn't know how. We'd like, oh shit, right, okay, it wasn't obvious and we had to do a whole UI redesign and stuff off the back of it. But it's kind of watching people experience your thing. Because that's it, you're making something for other people. You're not necessarily, there is an element of making the game that I want to play, but ultimately you're making a game that hopefully millions of other people want to play. And you have to walk a mile in their shoes quite a lot.
I'm glad you brought up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Will, please.
I was going to say, like, it's like stand-up comedy. Like, you can workshop a joke as much as you like, but you presented it, like, if no one's laughing when you present it, like, at an open mic night, like, that's when you know this joke needs work. Or I need to drop this. Like, it's the where the rubber meets the road is all you're doing, and your entire career is building a gut instinct on, like, they're gonna like this, they're gonna hate this is gonna be confusing, and you need to test those assumptions eventually, like in focus tests or early access or watching Twitch streams or something. And it's like, okay, right, straight back, like, we're gonna fix this. Like, you can immediately identify what they're struggling with, and then, you know, like, okay, we need to do something here. And I think that's having the humility to be able to own that, and then also the problem solving brain kicks in. Is like, okay, how do we solve this? It's too much information. It's not enough information. We're drawing your eye up here, but it should be down here. Like, knowing where people read, and I think Hal mentioned, like, knowing how people think is a huge part, not just about games, but just in general. Like, people like to feel like they've got something that no one else has. Like Hal said, having Sir above their name, it's a state, it's peacocking, it's self-expression, and it makes me feel unique, and people want to feel unique, and but not too much where it's like, oh, I kind of want a shared experience as well. So I want to feel safe that we've all got this thing. I want to be able to identify people in my tribe. You're also a Sir. You're also in my clan. You've also got the big helmet or something like being able to have something that's exclusive is so powerful. And if that's something cheap, so much the better in terms of development cost, because then we can have those moments a lot.
It's a really good point. I'm glad you guys bring up user testing, because it feels like there's two ideals when you're trying to create a tutorial. Because correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but when you're creating a game, like the tutorial or like the early game experience is where the player understands the mechanics, the world, how to really control their character, what they're meant to do. And I kind of see two schools of thought. You have the Nintendo tutorial, which is super optimized, big screen. This is what you need to click. Boom, 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 get through. Like Donkey Kong Bonanza was a tutorial I did recently. And I was thinking, wow, well, this is like super optimized. And then on the other end, you maybe have, I don't know, give me a game like The Last of Us, where you're kind of going through the story and you're not really going through a tutorial, but you're being introduced to game concepts in a very subtle sense. When you're user testing, you have to have a good understanding of your game, right? To know how people are supposed to get into it.
I mean, it's why developers are terrible at judging their own game. Once you spent 2 years, your neurons become programmed into, you know how it should work. So you understand how it works. So you're hard to look outside the box in terms of like, this is how it works. So it's fine. I can do this stuff. So the FTUI, the first time user experience part of any game, is probably one of the hardest bits to get right? Because again, it's the point when you start doing that you have to use a test. You have to be able to sort of subvert your own expectations and go, oh shit, right? You have to test it out. You have to try people cold on it. You know, to the extent that we have people left, you know, swapping around QA people, swapping around, getting people on other projects to come and play your game because they've never experienced it, right? Come and join our multiplayer tests and things like that. Is just being able to get a fresh perspective on what you're doing and validate what you're doing is so important. So important, because it's, if you're unwilling to let go, if you're what we call an ivory tower game designer, he's like, I've written my game design, I have my vision, and if the game does not conform to my vision, then the game is wrong and the game needs to be reworked. Rather than, this is the vision and we'll try and attain that vision, but the vision has to change as the game develops, right? So you have to change your expectations, change what you want, realize that something doesn't work, realize that, you know, that actually that ideal that worked sense on paper, that when expressed as in 2 sentences was like perfect, but actually trying to create something to do that, right? We need to modify those 2 sentences and kind of adapt what we're doing within the constraints, the overarching constraints of the game. So it's kind of, you have to question yourself lots and lots and lots, but also be certain. You know, you have to accept failure, right? You've got to go, right, we're going to do this. Because when you're going to do something, you're like, we've got to do this, follow me. This is a great idea. But then when you realize that idea is shit, you've got to be able to go, you know what? That was a terrible idea. Sorry, guys. Let's try again. And a lot of this is about buying yourself the time to be able to do that multiple times through the project and accept your failings and accept to be able to be reflective about what went wrong and how to fix it, right? You know, it doesn't, you soon, you know, to be successful in game design, you soon got to lose your ego.
Definitely.
I think
Because it's not
like a lot of, you know, there'll be headlines about a toxic culture in a workplace, in a game workplace, because it's generally ego will have got the better of the big vision, often in that sort of situation, and therefore you've got people who, you know, they want to be creative and they have ideas, but they might political or self-preservation kind of aspects might kick in, and then you've got this whole kind of problem of the objective. Our aim is now no longer the same as my individual aim, and that's when things break down. You know, it is a team that makes the game, and therefore you have to understand where you are in that team, what the team is doing, why the team is doing it is also really important, and then helping each other, supporting each other is so important. Yeah, so
I mean, and a team has to have a face. You have to have the way that the world works, right? You have to have a face on a project. You have to be the person that gets in front of the camera, that does the interviews, that talks to clients, that talks to the press and stuff like that. But at the same time, you gotta, you know, it's a very, very rare instance where that face is also an effective auteur, right? If that makes sense, right? You know what I mean? It is a team effort. The face has to have a certain amount of humility. And I think quite often people can believe that their own hype and become those ivory tower designers if you're not careful, right? I'm a genius. You know, I made this game and that game, and therefore I can do no wrong. But you have to have a certain amount of humility and accept the fact that bottling lightning is very, very hard, right? That, you know, a game's success is not just down to your genius. It's down to the team that you have around you, the realism of the vision you have, the backing that you've got to make that vision, and the sort of, and a good dose of luck.
I mean, I'm glad I brought up The Last of Us, but I kind of just thought when you were mentioning that, Nigel, Neil Druckmann in my height, like he probably had lightning in a bottle for the first Last of Us, but it just became kind of like an ego show with him. And then he started like going against the players on Twitter, and like, I'm not trying to make this political at all, but I think the point you bring up is really good about kind of this ivory tower designer, that it becomes, this is all me, this is my magic, this is my genius. But if you think about what makes a great game, it's the sound design, it's the combat design, it's the systems design, the interface, the tutorial. There's so many different minds and like a hive mind working together, that for someone to assume that this is all my genius, it's out of this world.
But you still need someone with a vision, right?
But
You still need a vision holder, but that vision holder needs to, again, be able to adapt their vision to suit the circumstances, not necessarily just chase one thing to the expense of everything else.
I look at film directors like Ridley Scott, who absolutely knows his mind, knows exactly what he wants, and will bring hellfire down to make sure these things happen, but is also humble enough to say, like, well, it was the script from this person, and this acting was incredible. Like, the credit it's the team, but is so confident in, I know exactly what I want, and it's this, and we're going to do this and this and this. And then you shoot the shots, and then it's like, okay, yeah, that sucked. We're going to do this now. But you need to, like Knife said, like, you need to be incredibly confident and then incredibly humble, which is very difficult, because once you achieve success, then the confidence stays as high as it is, but the humility starts to degrade. And I don't want to. I've not worked with anyone that I would say that is particularly the case with, but it is a risk, I think, with everything. Like, you start to believe any of your own hype, and you start to believe that maybe I am a genius, maybe I am magic, maybe it is because I am the only person who thinks like this, and not relying on your team to also bring you down to earth, but also to have differing perspectives, like being able to, as designers, liaise with everyone and be like, what do we think? Like getting commitment and getting buy-in means hearing alternative perspectives and things like that. But when you commit, we commit, and it's we have terms where we're like at my studio where we're not looking for consensus, but we want commitment. When we agree on something, we all agree, even if you don't think it's the best thing, we agree that this is what we're going to do. And once we have commitment, then we do that thing. But you also need to be held accountable for the thing that is then created. And I think accountability is just as important as getting commitment. And holding people to account. And that's very difficult in a political situation within an office where it's like, I don't want to lose my job by saying, you said we were going to do this and it screwed up. Like, we need to hold the work and thing that we committed to account. But we
Not
can't
be afraid
ever
to fail.
No, exactly. Like, the worst thing you could do is, I don't know. I'll know it when I see it. Just keep working. Like, you need to have a vision holder that is saying, we're going to do this, either for the whole project or literally just like, this level is going to be a spooky dungeon. And I think it's going to, and people might, it's not enough. Like, we just did a spooky dungeon. I think there's going to be too many. And then you play it and it's like, yeah, there's too many spooky dungeons. Like, you're right. There's too many. We either put it later or we're going to change it. But at the time, I believe this is correct. Like, you need to go with what is right now rather than like, oh, maybe later, or maybe another game's going to do spooky dungeons. Should we wait and see? That's why you'll have a
Indecision,
7-year
isn't it?
project.
Indecision
Exactly right.
cripples big projects that you've got lots of people going, oh, do you want, like, should we do A, B, or C? And then quite often you get the answer back, well, can we try all of them? And it's the best way forward is to go, no, we're going to do A, and then quickly realize that A was a bad idea and then pivot. It's usually quicker than trying to do all three things at the same time, right? Right, we'll try B now. A lot of game direction and lead design is about essentially being offered choices and making a unambiguous decision, because when you're working with big teams and big functional teams and loads of pod groups, you need to make sure that they're deployed in the right place and they're constantly moving forward as a kind of a coherent team. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. It's hard to pin down exactly what it feels like to operate on that sort of level, but it's kind of, I think it is what it is, right? It's game design.
It's art. It's art. You're going to get ego. You're going to get kind of discussions like, what does it mean to make a game? Like, you're doing a creative endeavor that doesn't have necessarily specific.
And some people get
rules.
very, very passionate about what they're doing, right? And a lot of the time it's about like, no, not quite that, or, don't go that far down that route. Just sort of like hold it back. And so yeah, game design is a lot about how to get teams to do stuff and basically getting team dynamics and communication and effectively breaking down ideas quickly in a way that's absolutely certain, but also at the same time probably needs iterating.
I think on a specific note then, sorry, Nigel, how do you communicate a vision then? Like, if I have to think practically, sure, like there has to be a vision holder, someone that is kind of championing what this game is going to be about, that has the gut instinct to make a level or a certain type of design. But realistically on the job, is this, like, I'm coming from a product standpoint, like, is there a product requirements document, a PRD? Is there, what type of documents? What is it, like a presentation? Is it just lots of meetings, getting everyone to, how do you actually get a 10-person, 50-person, 100-person team to like understand a vision from one vision holder?
I'll kind of jump in on that one. I'm sure we've all got kind of useful insights, but the way that I think is a useful way to approach this is to get the core creative leaders together. I think one person is the wrong approach. Getting the core creative leaders to hash out between them a single sentence about the game. And it can't be 2 sentences. It can't be like, you can't have semicolons being fake full stops and all that sort of stuff. No, it's got to be like a very clear single sentence. And the reason that you have a group of people doing it is because these are the people that have to understand and buy into the vision. And so they have to be part of the discussion that irons out what it is, but almost more importantly, what it isn't. So that you then have a shared understanding of the same vision. that can then be disseminated out to the rest of the team. And the importance of having it written down rather than just a thing you've agreed is that you can use it as a decision raiser later on. When feature creep or marketing or whatever sort of say, you know what, we've got this thing that we'd just like to put in there, and you say, well, here's our vision. Does it agree with it, or does it contradict it? If it contradicts it, it's easy. If the difficult is if you go, actually, yeah, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? But at least then you know that you're doing it for interesting and valid reasons. Yeah, that's my approach on that. But
I was right. It's a collective endeavor, right? That usually, there's some representation of a visual lead. There's some representation of a technical lead. There's some production on there, and usually there is game design or game direction or project lead, someone to chair that group, and effectively they as a group steer things. Quite often, not the vision is important, but quite often obviously the vision quite quickly and what you're doing is broken down into a series of tasks by production, right? So not everybody necessarily needs to know that this is the big picture and this is what we're doing. All they know is you need to make some crates, and these crates need to look like they're from the 1920s and on an Egyptian dock, right? And that's kind of like probably enough. It's nice to know the big picture, but I think quite often you have to keep it at quite high level abstracts, right? Because the big picture is this 100-page game design, and very few people actually sit down and read it and digest it. There's definitely a big disconnect between the big picture and the design. I think you can encapsulate, say, spend money to build a castle, right? That's your big picture. Everybody knows, right? Okay, yeah, I understand that. I don't need to know anymore. But then as for a game designer, it's like, where does that money come from? Like, how do I save the money? How much do things cost? What bits can I buy with my money, right? What happens to the money when I buy it? Yeah, there's so many details that it almost crowds out that spend gold to buy money. So there's some people on the team, all they need to know is spend gold to buy money. And then there's some people who need to know to read that 30-page design document that designers created that details exactly how money arrives into the economy and goes out of the economy. And that's a very small subset of people who need to know that detail, because nobody really cares unless it's rubbish when you're finished, right? Because that's the problem. It's like the hygiene thing, right? If it doesn't quite work, people will tell you exactly what's wrong with it, or not exactly what's wrong with it, but will tell you it doesn't work. So does that make sense? It's kind of like we back to this. We operate on two levels. We operate on the big picture. We operate on the micro picture as well.
I think establishing a sentence. I've worked at places where it's pillars. What are the key pillars of the experience? Being able to summarize your game, not just in terms of mechanics, but in terms of experience. I think experiential goals are so much more powerful and meaningful and actionable in many ways, because it keeps a creative, the space creative, like open for you to, for the team who are going to be doing the good work, to fill it with what do we think we want to do. But if it's like, I want the player to be able to feel like they've gone from a pauper to being a king, like that's what I want from my progression field. I want it to look like it's the middle, like I want to feel like I'm in the Middle Ages. I want it to be living and breathing this experience. And like all of these experiences, and then you'll get Kingdom Come Deliverance or something at the end of it. Like, I want to be able to go wherever I like, traverse the lands and meet interesting people, like all of these things. How we do it, that's for the team to figure out, and like those are for micro discussions down the line. But to establish that vision, we want to do this, we want to do this. Oh, I want the player to feel this. I've seen it more in terms of like the end result is this, because that's something as well that at the end of the day you can then check against. Does the player feel like they have gone from rags to riches? Does the player feel like they are living in the Middle Ages? It's very easy to say, well, you said I used gold and I bought castle. I did it. It's like, yeah, but it's this pixel art thing. Okay, you misinterpreted. And I think that's the thing. Like, we want it to be checkable at the end. Do I get this experience? Does the player feel like this thing? And then designers can have their conversations and artists can have their conversations, and we're all kind of running from the same hymn sheet. But I think, I mean, there's been so many kind of words written about starting from why and understanding the intent of the project or of a feature or of a gun. Like, what is the intent first and foremost, and then we can see and check against it later. But I think the more we can both constrain but also enable the team to be able to do their best work within the confines that we've set within the wider confines of the vision of the project, I think the better.
What happens when numbers gets involved, right? So we're looking at data. Sometimes we've talked a lot about operating on your instinct, kind of getting players to play test your game, maybe see how they react, getting fresh eyes on it. What happens when, I mean, more and more increasingly, you see games operate underneath kind of a data mindset, and that's correct. You want the qualitative and the quantitative together. There's no way you can operate without one or the other. But how does that then influence the direction you take a game, a vision? I point to maybe ARC Raiders. I'm sure when they released the game, they were looking at the data of how players were playing. How far were they getting? What items were they finding? All of a sudden, your assumptions are being tweaked by actual indications of inputs and actions that players are taking. How do you work around that?
You need good data scientists. You need to ask the right questions of the data, basically. And yeah, and again, just like any design constraint, right? Oh, we need to improve. The players are dying here a lot. What do we do about it? That suddenly is something that you need to fix. How you fix that, that's back to pure design, right? There's a million ways you could fix it, but try to understand what the root of the problem is means you kind of need good data scientists and asking the right questions. Because sometimes data can seem it's one thing, whereas the other. It's the old analogy of the aircraft that come back that land with all the bullet holes in them, right? You know what I mean? And the fact that like it wasn't that they were getting shot loads there. It's just that that's where you got shot and the aircraft survived. That data, it can be can deceive you in some ways. So I think you have to be very, very careful how you approach it. But it is super valuable. If you've got good data scientists, you're asking the right questions and you're kind of deploying teams to sort of fix those in the right way, I think is invaluable. Certainly on a live service game, right? It's kind of like you're never going to get it perfect the first time around, no matter how much you try.
Yeah, I think like our game is now in early access and we're getting player data, but even things like CCUs and like how many people are playing right now, and you think like that's not really an indication of how well a game is doing just by looking at how many people are online. Like the number of accounts created versus the number of people are playing online right in any given time are massively out of sync. And so like taking one bit of data alone doesn't tell you the full picture. It's like, what is the context of this? How many dungeons have been completed? How many chests have been opened? How many orcs have been killed? Like, okay, this gives us something, but like you have data and you need to turn data into information. And then from information, you could like pass this in a way that lets me make then an informed decision, because numbers alone can be used to tell you the sky is falling, or could be used to like we're all going to buy Bentleys because how great is this? Is like don't read too much into everything. Has got an asterisk next to it in terms of like how do we want to respond to this information. But I'm a huge believer. Like as a designer, early in your career, you're like, you shouldn't tell me what to do. I want free reign to do whatever. And boy, is that like asking, like children asking for endless sweets. What do you want for dinner? I want pizza again. You mature into a point where like the best thing you can give me as a designer is constraints. Give me limitations, give me numbers that I can work with, because I do my best work when I know that it needs to fit in this square hole. I need to know what my limitations are. If I design something, I will over-design at the drop of a hat because I just want to do interesting things. I need the feedback either before release, and it's like, no, it needs to fit with. Okay, great. But afterwards, it's like, okay, this is over-designed. Okay, like I want to reduce, I want to simplify, I want to make it as elegant and as simple as possible. And I think more constraints either at the start of a project when you're setting your vision is like, and it must run on a Nintendo DS, and therefore I know my inputs, I know my screen size, I know my memory capacity. Okay, it must not last more than 5 minutes because we're making this game as like an interstitial between two other things, or it's part of a multi-pack, or it's part of a VR experience. Those constraints are so invaluable, either at the start when you're setting the vision of the project, or after launch and you're doing live iterations and updates. you bring them on. Like it's so helpful to know, like we said with user testing, it's just another form of player feedback. And what designer doesn't want to understand how a player interacts with its systems?
Hal, did you want to comment?
I was just thinking about how meaningful Will's last sentence there was. I was just basking in the
Clip
idea of, but no, I can't. I don't think I can really add without just kind of hearing my own voice. I think understanding the symptom is different to understanding the cause. I think that's vital. And I guess the beauty of having player data rather than user tests is that you don't get so cross because you can see people messing it up. They're messing up at a distance, which is always easy to deal with.
Well, Will, you mentioned young designers. So I think one aspect that I love touching upon is young designers that are listening right now, or maybe prospective game designers that want to break into the industry. Kind of what advice do we all have for someone who, let's say on one hand, let's start with the prospective game designer that hasn't broken in yet. And then I'd love to touch upon maybe the younger game designer already kind of in a game role, perhaps, and trying to see how they can rise up. But let's start with the first one, which is someone who doesn't know game design. How do you break in? Like, where do you start?
Well, I mean, I broke in just through QA. Like, I think that's just getting to know a game dev from a testing point of view. I don't know if that's still the way now, like, because there's so many schools, like really solid schools. Stockholm has 3 game schools. I know there's university courses in the UK that also have game-specific runs. So I'm seeing so many, like most of the applicants that we see now as juniors are coming in through a game school or another. There's a smattering of self-taught, but for the bulk that we get now, and it's to such a high quality, like just learning the tool set, learning, like I can do Unreal, I can do Unity, I can do a bit of Godot, I can do Python or other similar like scripting languages. Like as a designer, seeing, because we get the primary is either level or tech design, I think, as those basic entry level roles. We don't realistically want to be hiring more system designer, more kind of big picture, like holding the whole project and how these major systems work. It's normally, I think, at entry level roles you're looking at pushing pixels in a dungeon or in a level or in a physical space with the editor tool, or moving these numbers around, setting up some door interactions or some trigger boxes, like doing the tech setup within the physical space is normally where we look at our entry positions. And the schools that are putting out such great students, like they are so well versed in the tool set, like they're way better than what I can do. Like I'm asking my interns or my juniors, how do I do this thing? Because you've had much more familiar. I've been thinking about how the progression systems works. So it's like, how do I make this thing? Oh, there's a thing with the latest version of Unreal. Like they are so good. So I think if you go to school, if you're self-teaching, if you want to get into like familiarity with what is the industry standard stuff that you can get for free, like the Unreals, the Unities, the Godots, and like getting familiar with just how the process of making content, doing like so many great YouTube tutorials. I'm still like living my life on YouTube tutorials right now. Because I want to do something specific and I don't know how to do this. Okay, see how this works. I'm trying to figure out how plugins work. Okay, there's a guide for it. So being open to teaching yourself and being self-developing is also like, these are the skills that I really value when I talk to people. Like, I don't know how to do it, but I've just figured it out. Like learning how to learn, I think, as a developer, because the industry does not want to stand still for a second. So if I know how to make a game, it's like next week, no, you don't, because something's changed, something's new, some different type of thinking has moved us around. So yeah, I think from a junior point of view, those are the kind of skills that I think really help. And then it's reaching out to studios, like that's like everything, I guess.
Yeah, we have a graduate program, and as much as it pains me, because I got in this industry by being a dungeon master, but those days are long gone. I think now, to sort of hiring a designer, a designer needs to display an advanced competency in a game engine, usually Unreal. right? Possibly Unity, possibly some others, but they need to show that they can craft games, they can build games, they can kind of put things together, they understand their way around the engine, they understand the components of a game, and that usually comes from higher education, right? Good universities, but there's a lot of people coming through there, so you have to be in that top percentile of students to land a job. You have to excel because the competition for juniors or those sort of graduate positions is super strong right now. You know, for a graduate position, generally we'll get 200-300 candidates, and the people that we hire are superb. But they just learn their craft. They know, you know, we're not going to let a junior just sort of write the ideate pitch for a new game, right? They're going to come into a game and they're going to be tuning weapons. They're going to be playing around with kind of AI behaviors. They're going to be writing data tables and things like that. But they need to be able to get into that engine and then show interest in what they're doing, right? Because even if you're playing with the data table, you're still doing something creative. You still need to think about the end user. And put in the hours, basically just sort of, you know, get in, know your craft, put in the hours. I mean, we generally, we have a test. So any juniors, we have we've got a really badly written and fundamentally flawed design test that we give to people.
So one of your game designs? So one of your designs? You just ask them
Yeah. It's a terrible design, right? But it's like, make this little game. You've got a certain amount of time to do it. We've been through the process with it numerous times. We know where it's flawed. We know where it's broken. Make this thing, shows you can make it, shows you understand the tools, but also write up where it is broken and what else you do with it to make it unbroken, which shows both the technical capabilities, but also that insight into like, oh, actually, if it was my design, I'd change this. And that that does really well, but it is absolutely the pillar of it. You can't just walk in now without technical skills. You have to have those technical skills.
I think that, obviously earlier on we talked about hygiene. I think that's getting to the point now where that is a designer's kind of base tool set, which ironically makes the soft skills more important because they can be what stands out, someone who's fantastic at doing Unreal and someone who maybe not quite as good, but they communicate like a natural, right? Or they just understand how to converse with people, how to get things across. It's getting to the point where it's the person rather than the skill set that you need to hire, because the skill sets are almost universal.
Yeah. Well, Unreal is a toolkit, right? And quite often we're going to ask you to use a completely different toolkit, but you need the skills, as you say, and the person needs to be able to adapt that. And so, a lot of what we do interviewing, so you got the technical test, but a lot of it is about team fit, about personality, about, are you the sort of person who can operate in a team? Are you the sort of person who can work with other people? You know, how's your communication skills? Can you communicate ideas to people? Are you afraid to ask questions? You know, you're just going to sit there and go, I'm stuck, and not say anything. We want people who have a certain amount of gregariousness, and we'll go like, excuse me, can I have some help here, please? You need to be a sort of be empathic, as Hal said. You need to understand other people. It's definitely, you know, there's either a technical aspect to game design, there's a creative aspect of game design, but there's also an interpersonal aspect of game design. You can't be a dick.
I think,
but
yeah. I think the no brilliant assholes approach to hiring, like, certainly at entry level, I'm sure like there's a lot of very insular, high functioning people on the spectrum who are very, very good, but and they run projects. Like, there's some people who are just like, they're managing their like neurodivergency in such a way that they contribute. But I think when you are designing, we've touched on this many times, like, you are the glue, like the grease, sorry, not the glue. You are going to people, you're asking for asking questions. You're like, if I want to do this, is this expensive or is this something straightforward? Like, I don't know, so I need to go and find out. Like, there's so much self-motivation. Even at entry level, you are getting up and you're connecting with your team. This isn't a job where you sit there, work comes in, you do the work and you move it on. Like, you are like as a DM, as a reference before, like you are the one who is running the party, like you're running the group. You need to make sure, like, where are we with this thing? Like you're a little bit of project organizer, like, because nothing's done in isolation. You're doing your work, and then I need the animation to work with this move set. I need this gun to, like, if I'm going to do the reload and then this VFX isn't triggering, I need to go tell VFX, or like I need it to trigger on this trigger point. The door needs to open, but it animates the wrong way. I need to reverse this animation. All right, I need to go speak to animation. Like there's a certain level of connection, not just in me and the new starter, but also that new starter and other people, their peers, and to be able to go and talk to them and not just kind of be passive. The eventual end to if you climb the ranks as a designer is you are going to be standing up and presenting your designs yourself. Like you are the champion of your own design work, and if you are not a good effective communicator, if you're not able to logically think and solve problems and be able to engage with people and get buy-in, get that commitment that we talked about. Like even at a very low level, you need to get commitment on the work that you're doing. And if you can't advocate for that in a respectful and constructive way, like these are reasons why we've let go of designers before, of like they're just a bit of an ass. Like they're so in love with what they've created that they don't open themselves up to feedback, or they take it so incredibly poorly that it's not a good fit for them. And so finding a good culture fit of like, if you're going to join our team, you need to be a team player in the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the split also in the way we're mentioning how important soft skills are in communication, how you mentioned hygiene, because that kind of answers the second part of the question, which is if you're already an existing game designer, you want to rise the ranks, it's that communication, it's that ability to work with others, to kind of find trade-offs in order to work towards the vision, not necessarily what you think the game should be, but what we all kind of have agreed the game should be.
Yeah.
I think that the greater your specialization, then the harder it will be to find a perfect fit. And the converse is also true. The more things you can do, then the more use you can be to a group of people. Either can work, but I suspect the latter is probably a more generalized approach that will have a wider chance of success. So I think being able to do lots of things is probably more useful to an organization than being able to do one thing super well.
Specialization is for insects, as we say. You've got to adapt. You've got to be able to think on your feet. You've got to be open to change.
I think I know we're going back to a little bit talking about starting in the industry, but if you get into this industry and you're like, I love narrative, I want to be a narrative designer, I think it's good that you know what you're into, but there are certain roles that aren't necessarily going to be hiring or are not prevalent. There's probably more games that don't hire narrative designers at all as a discipline, and everyone on the team is kind of chipping in with a narrative because it's something that we can all contribute. And yeah, I'm sure a narrative designer would do a better job of it, but we're a lean design team, and therefore we're not going to look for those particular roles. And so I think it's also helpful knowing coming into this thing, it's like if you specialize at an early point in your career, you are limiting who is going to want to pick you up or work with you. If you're a narrative level designer and someone comes in as like, I'm a technical level designer, or I'm just a tech designer in general, it's like, I probably want to speak to the tech designer, because when we don't have any level stuff, there's probably some weapon stuff, or there's some combat things, or maybe making the UI backend work. Like it gives me an understanding more about their technical skills than necessarily like, but I'm very good at writing, or I'm very good at one particular thing. It's like, we probably would look, maybe unless there was a specific role open for like, we're looking for a narrative designer, but if we're looking for like, okay, who's from a graduate intake, it's like, it's the people that can help us the most, because we're not always going to have like one data table for them to look at, but we could use your help over here right now. And being flexible designer and being open to learning new things is just it's a skill that we all secretly have but don't necessarily talk about. It's just our adaptability.
And you can specialize as you go on. I mean, at Wushu now, we've got some of our juniors are now into their sort of 4th or 5th years of engagement with us now. They've been here. So they've come through the ranks of junior. They've been at the coalface. They're kind of generally hired as technical or level designers. But as they mature, as we get to understand what they like and dislike, what they're good at, what they're not so good at, we can kind of help point them in some ways. We will generally help people specialize over time, that as we understand them as a developer, because that's the important thing, right? Especially in code development, as I say, when you're getting multiple projects that are all slightly different shape, you have to fit people to these projects. You have to create right, who's going to do this work? Oh, it's this guy because he loves guns, right? He started with as a junior, but he's an absolute gun bunny. This is a shooty game, put him on it, right? Or she's actually, as a junior, she was very good technically, but she also took charge of some of the missions, and actually she did a really good job creating the narrative on some of the missions. Do you want to, is there a role for a narrative designer? Would you like to further your career as a narrative designer? Do you want to move away from technical design and be more of a sort of big picture lead designer, sort of traditional design sort of thing? There's room to sort of adapt and specialize as you move through your career. You don't have to necessarily come to us, certainly as a junior, you don't have to come fully fledged sort of thing, right? You're still a sort of chrysalis to a certain degree. But at the same time, and again, when we do want specialists, generally, when we need a specialist, we hire a specialist. And generally those are our greybeards, right? Those are our people who have got a proven track record of doing what we want them to do on published titles in various different institutions, right? I'm not the longest serving person in the game industry at Wushu, right? We've got people with 40 years deep in it, and we know exactly what they're good at. We know exactly what they can do. And quite often they're not leaders. They're just happy being an absolute specialist, right? Put me on this. I do rendering, I do narrative, I do level design, right? I don't want to lead people. I don't want to be in charge of anything, but like point me at a level, give me a description of that level. And I have, as a sort of, as a director company, I have trust that that person can just go and make me some levels, and probably have a bunch of junior level designers, mid-level level designers behind around them to lead by example, but they don't necessarily want to be, they're not a manager or anything like that. But people grow up. People grow up in the industry. It takes time to find your groove.
We mentioned specializations for insects. And in a lot of ways, we want kind of juniors or people coming into game studios, kind of rising the ranks, to be able to be generic enough to put their hands in different baskets. Why not build your own game as well?
It's a great way to show your skills if you can do it, right? I think there's nothing wrong, nothing bad about doing it. Yeah. In fact, it takes a lot of effort.
One of my best technical designers came to us after making his own game and releasing it on Steam. He basically made a little bit of money from work. He took 2 years off work. He built his own game in Steam. He released it in Unreal. He released it on Steam. It did okay, but wasn't paying the rent. And then it came to us and we hired him straight away. Right. But that's a life commitment, right? Not everybody has the luxury to go, you know what? I'm not going to earn a living for 2 years. I'm going to do this. Right. The coming through that sort of junior rank sort of thing and into an organization like us, it gives you a sense of stability. It gives you a career. It gives you an income. It allows you to do things. Not everybody is financially independent. And especially in a situation where, I mean, this is a kind of slight tangential thing that our diversity is, we've tried really hard to sort of increase diversity in game development over the last 10, 15 years. And I think we're doing a really good job of it. But one thing that I think is still a blocker to a lot of developers or young developers is class rather than necessarily, or financial, sort of family financial situation, right? That a lot of our developers that come through, our juniors, are all nice middle-class kids because they've kind of, they've been given the chance to sort of get an education. They've managed to take on a student loan. They kind of, they had parents who were supportive, who kind of maybe helped them out to get a foot on the rung. And that's fine. But you look, not everybody can afford to sit down and make their own game, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even if you've got it, like you've got a day job and then you're doing it in your evenings, like that is a fast track to burnout. If you're looking to make anything more than like a demo experience or like a little proof of concept, if you're making something start to finish with the production values that you're setting out to the point where you want to sell it on Steam, like that is either quit your job or you are working two jobs essentially, and that's difficult to ask or say this would really help you. And I wouldn't recommend, other than unless it's like you're calling, I was going to be doing it anyway. I've been noodling in my spare time. I'm enjoying game development as a hobby. I want to go professional. Then, either finish that or make it into something presentable so you can put it into a portfolio. But I think, yeah, difficult to say like, hey, make your own project. I know there's fantastic amounts of mod teams, and I think that's probably that way. It's not just on you, like you're contributing to a total conversion or a mod or something like along those lines, or making a level for an existing project. I think those are the kind of things that are just as valuable, because I think when you're looking at someone making something, as if I'm praising them for a job, I want to be able to see that you've got a quality, like attention to detail, quality, that you can finish something, that you can set a direction and then deliver on it. Like all of those little things, it's about discipline at the end of the day. It's like, can you technically do a thing, and can you creatively finish a thing, and can you meet the requirements of, especially if it's a mod, of someone else's vision and make it integrate in a certain way, and then stand in front of it and kind of advocate for it. I think all of those things are kind of a test of a character and also a skill set. So there's different ways in terms of like making a thing as a demonstration of your skills, and it can come in a bunch of different forms. I think straight up making a game is risky as something to advocate for.
Guys, we've had such an incredible conversation. We've really talked about what game design is at a fundamental level. We've looked at procedural game design, what it has been and what it can be. We've talked about holding a vision and being able to champion something, but also working within large teams, play testing, growing into the role, which I think is really what this channel is about. That's why I started. It's kind of getting young people to get a look into the industry and think, okay, how do I get into this? It's such a creative, passionate position that it's sometimes not very clear. I wanted to go around and get some closing statements on kind of what we've discussed today. Any thoughts? Just to really end it on what I think has been a high note and been a fantastic conversation.
I think the games industry is an interesting point right now in terms of big budget failures and obviously layoffs and a lot of kind of uncertainty about the future of where the space is going. But I think focusing on like where the innovation is, where the growth is coming from, like people are still playing games more than ever and they're still having a great time. And I think there's still a ton of opportunity and exciting space within games. I think it's going through an interesting transition right now. And I think what's been heartening today has been talking about where those opportunities are and where the interesting things and the meat of game designs particularly still lies. And I think it's been really cool.
Yeah, I guess
think
game design is one of those quite hard to define things, right? It's quite hard to put your finger on exactly what it does. But it's a fascinating career. It's kind of, I've built a long career out of it. And I think having that spark of creativity, having that desire to work with others, having that need to express yourself in a kind of interactive fashion is kind of cool. And kind of, there's a fundamental pull towards doing that. Quite often game designers can kind of get painted as the people who can't code and can't draw, right? Who make games. But I think we're more than that. And I think, what we offer is quite intangible because we're offering interactivity and fun and aesthetic values beyond just the visual and the auditory. So if you fancy that, then there is a way into games. I think people will always want to play games. There will always be a way into the games industry if you want it hard enough. You've got to chase it. It's not, we're in a position where we just hire everybody who happens to do a games degree, right? We're hiring the best people who are doing games degrees because there's already a lot of good people out there who have been making games for many, many years. It's cool. Go on, Hal.
I think that everybody who's in the games industry is in there because they want to be in there, right? I think that's a fundamental difference to like an old-fashioned industrial career, for example. And so it can be a most wonderful community to work with people who are intelligent, who are articulate, who are undoubtedly talented, and generally are not arseholes, I think, which is a good thing. Present company accepted, of course. But it can be just a really, really fun place to work. But I think work is the word, that sentence that probably gets overlooked, right? It is not necessarily an easy career. It's not going to break your hands, but it might break your soul occasionally. But I think I've always found it tremendously rewarding, and the rewards are both the journey of the friends you make along the way, right? But there's also that sense of I made that, and people are enjoying it. And I think that sense of feeling like you've contributed something and made other people enjoy something is a very intangible sense of worth, I think.
Yeah. I met someone who played a game that I made years ago. It was Motorstorm RC. There's like 12, 15 people put that together while we were working on Drive Club. And someone came and said, "Oh, you made that! Like, absolutely love that." Me and my friends, we played that all the time. I was like, I don't think anyone played that game. This is incredible. And just meetings, it's like immediately, it's that bite of old food in Ratatouille. Like the nostalgia, just boom. Like it took me right back to that time. Those people that we made it, like staying up late to ship a build, the launch day, and being overshadowed by, I think Wipeout had done a game on the Vita, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah. We're also the little team that could, but I felt such pride in making that game and with those people. And I think I look back at all the projects that I've worked on, and some have been well received, and some of them have kind of trickled out, and no one really talked about them at all. And I think I loved working with those people much more, I think, at the end of the day, than the games themselves. Like I'm very proud of the games, but I'm even more proud of the relationships that I've built up over the years. And I think this is an industry full of creatives wanting to create for the joy of creating. Sometimes, like this is, if you're a coder, you're going to get more money making software for banks. If you're an artist, you're going to make more money in other, like this is, the people who make games love games. And I think that's such a heartening thing. It doesn't feel like work sometimes when you come into an office or you're on a call with people and you just enthuse about the subject, like what we're going to do today, how are we going to make this better, with an end goal of like, this is something is going to play, this is going to entertain, and someone is going to enjoy and derive joy from the thing that we're making. Like it's just so rewarding.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been the first roundtable. I've had a really good time, and it's going to make for an interesting episode, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks for having us and allowing us just to sort of waffle on about the olden times in game development and the modern times. But you don't often get the chance to sort of talk shop at length. That's all.
And I hope we do this again. This has been great.
Me too. Thank you so much.
That's
Likewise.
nice.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye bye.
See you, folks.